The first time I found out about Bitcoin or heard about Bitcoin, I dismissed it. I dismissed it as nerd money. I think, like many people who today dismiss it, I didn't grasp the importance or the depth of the subject. Even though I have been in cryptocurrencies since the late 80s, early 90s, I had been interested in cryptocurrencies, and I had followed the cryptography behind such systems as David Chaum's DigiCash and Chaumian signatures and things like that. I didn't at first get it. I think I was in a place where I wasn't ready at the time. And then the second time I heard about Bitcoin, for some reason I decided to try and go to the source and read it from Satoshi Nakamoto's paper. And so I started reading Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, and I remember how at some point it just clicked. And I had this almost revelatory experience where I suddenly realized, oh my God, it's not a currency. It's a network. And I get networks and I understand networks. And not only is it a network, but it achieves something incredible. It achieves consensus. It achieves trust without centralized authority. This is so much more important than currency. It's so much bigger than currency. And that experience put me in an almost obsessive state. I spent the next 6 months reading everything I could about Bitcoin, analyzing the code, writing codes, trying to start businesses in Bitcoin. It became my obsession. And this was not the first time I've become obsessed with technology. It's a life pattern for me. It had happened to me the first computer I acquired at age 10. The first time I used a modem and connected to a BBS and talked to other people. The first time I went on the internet. The first time I installed Linux. And in each one of these moments, the technology just enthralled me. Bitcoin has been the strongest such feeling I've had. And it made my life very difficult for 6 months. I didn't eat, sleep, or take care of myself, and I was just consumed by it. And funnily enough, when I talked to other people about this experience, instead of them seeing me with kind of a weird look and thinking, oh, well, that's weird, why would you get so obsessed with the technology that you don't eat or sleep? So many people say to me, wow, that's exactly what happened to me too. And it's kind of like a shared experience in the community, I think. Being able to see something that on its surface appears so simple, but once you start examining it, just has these layers and layers of complexity. And the implications of each one of these layers is just staggering. I think the myth of Satoshi Nakamoto is one that can cause some confusion, especially to new people in the space. And primarily the reason for that is because in currencies that are centrally controlled, who has the control is vitally important. There is an authority of the central issuer of the currency, and the value of the currency is based on that authority. In cryptocurrencies that derive their power and trust from an algorithm, the authority of the issuer is really irrelevant. The authority of the creator of the currency is really completely irrelevant. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are based on math. Who invented the specific equation, or who discovered the combination of technologies that work together to create this cryptocurrency and make it resilient, really has nothing to do with its future. Satoshi Nakamoto has no more control over the currency than I do. And I know this because I can read the source code, so it doesn't matter who Satoshi is. It matters to me as much as it matters who Euclid was. We don't really know who Euclid was. We don't really know who Archimedes was. We have these snippets of historic documents, which actually probably confuse several different scientists who existed over approximately the same period and around the same century and around the same geography. And so, some of them invented geometry and some of them invented this and that. We don't really know who invented geometry. We don't really care care who invented Euclidean geometry, because I can use Euclidean geometry to predict the location of an object. I can use Euclidean geometry to analyze the properties of a physical system, and the origin or personality or nature or goodness or motives or identity of the inventor or discoverer of Euclidean geometry has absolutely no bearing with whether the geometry works or not. Similarly, even if you only look at Bitcoin, because I think we need to look more broadly at other cryptocurrencies where we do know the inventors and they're based on the same idea, but they're just rehashing that concept in different ways. Like, for example, with Litecoin, it's Charlie Lee. I've met him several times. He's, he's someone you can point to and say he invented Litecoin. It's based on the same invention as Satoshi's, but it's a different one. Does it matter who Satoshi is? No, because Satoshi has no control. But does it provide endless fascination for the media? Of course. Primarily because the media are accustomed to narratives that have a centralized actor. And because centralized systems depend on the motives of these actors, the first question they ask when you ask them about the stability of a system is, who is the actor at the center of it and can they be trusted? It's very difficult for them to understand a narrative where there is no actor at the center of it. There is an inventor, but that inventor has no power over the system and no influence of it. But they revert to the same narrative, the narrative of leaders, of actors, of controllers. And that narrative is much easier to explain. You have to put a human face on Bitcoin, and there is no human face for Bitcoin. But I totally understand the motivations that Satoshi Nakamoto had as well. I like to think of it similarly to the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus, who took fire from the gods and gave it to man. And for that transgression, he was punished with eternal torment, tied to a rock and having his liver eaten by an eagle every day, which is, a way for the ancient Greeks to express the hubris of the gods when their power is taken away. When you offend power, it retaliates. And the one thing I do know about Satoshi is that had he or she or they not disappeared, they would have been smeared. They would have been made to discredit Bitcoin. They would have had their background endlessly scrutinized, their motivation endlessly scrutinized. The needs of the narrative of a centralized actor would have chewed up their life and destroyed them, because they would have simultaneously created a most disruptive technology that will offend so many interests that would have plenty of motivation to smear them. But at the same time, they would also have come into quite a big chunk of money that would make them a target for all kinds of nefarious people who would want a piece of that money. Satoshi Nakamoto is simultaneously a revolutionary and a lottery winner. And both of those have very bad times in their lives because they get enormous scrutiny and they get enormous negative attention from many, many people. I think Satoshi Nakamoto did the smartest thing they could do and disappeared. And we may never find out who Satoshi Nakamoto was. I like to think that when I go to a conference, Satoshi Nakamoto is there and she's pretending to be one of the audience. I think the crowd is maturing all the time. But at the same time, I'm not naive enough to think that the people who buy Bitcoin today buy it because of a deep conviction in the principles of decentralization, or because they see the enormous potential and impact decentralized consensus has on the future form of our culture and our world. They see Bitcoin as a speculative opportunity. The vast majority of people who buy Bitcoin because they've seen the price go up and they want to make some money. And so when the price goes down, since they have no particular conviction, they'll sell in a panicky fashion. But over time, I think, as the volatility has decreased And as each successive round of wild upswings and panicky downswings has gone around, people notice that Bitcoin has a tendency to bounce back. It's quite resilient. The lows are never lower than twice the previous high. And so under those circumstances, I think they're beginning to think, well, maybe I should hold. There's less panicky sentiment, especially after the last big rundown, after the news out of China was first very positive, then very negative, then somewhat positive again. I think a lot of people expected Bitcoin to disappear in 2013. They didn't expect it to make the end of the year. They expected that it would go down to zero. And when it didn't, when it was still around in January, that's when we started seeing the next run up. And people are more confident now that it seems to be an extremely resilient currency, even in the price, which has very little to do with the fundamental technology. And over time, as investors come in, I think we're going to see fewer and fewer of these swings.